everybody. I'm literally in the middle of editing this video and found out it's pretty long. So I'm gonna have to end up cutting this video in two parts. I think the people that are interested in this and finding out how to build their own greenhouse, at least get the basics for it, are gonna want to see all this information, because this is 6 months of work that I'm scrunching down into about a half hour, 40 minutes. So I want to make sure that I hit all the good points, and so you can move forward with your project. But at the same time, I don't want to get crazy in depth where it just goes over everybody's head. But I do want to break it up into two parts. So coming at you, the first part right now is going to be the part where I tell you the plans of the greenhouse and how I got to where I got as far as the shell of the greenhouse to get you enclosed, and hopefully this will help you out. So enjoy part one, and I'll be back to get you into part two. Thank you. Hi everyone, coming to you from the greenhouse. This is, as far as I understand, the most, I'll call it, asked question about the greenhouse is, what are the plans? Most people sound like they want to do it themselves, and that's great, and I want to help encourage you to do that. I want to help you get to that point where you feel comfortable enough to make a greenhouse like this, because honestly, when I started, I was not to that point. So don't get discouraged feeling like you have to know everything and be able to do everything right away. I took it basically one step at a time, and we went from there. So the biggest by far thing I can kind of bring out is, just like real estate, your greenhouse has the three main keys: location, location, location. That's the same with your greenhouse. Location is key. When you want your greenhouse up here in the Northeast in New York, we are gonna want to have the greenhouse southern facing, and I did a fair amount of research on that. And southern facing, you want it, it doesn't need to be exact. Don't go crazy with it, just get it close. What I read online was you can be about 10-15 degrees off one way or another, so you don't have to be perfect. You can try and match it with whatever else is going on in your yard or your house. Try and match up the angles as best you can, so you do not have to be perfectly southern facing. So keep that in mind. The other thing you want to get in mind for location is that the sun obviously has a different path in the winter, summer, spring, and fall. So you're going to want to take that into consideration, because when we started, we actually had our post for the four corners of our greenhouse in a completely different place. So what we found out in that location is that the trees in the winter would actually be covering up, I'd say, about 50% of the sun for the day on the greenhouse. So obviously we didn't want that. There would have been, either I would have had to cut down a lot of trees to make that happen, or we would have had to deal with that, which why put up a big greenhouse like what we have and go forward with everything to have 50% of the sun during the winter. We looking at the path of the sun in the spring, fall time, we would have had a lot more sun, because the path of the sun would have gotten over those trees. So location, location, location. The original spot that we planned was about 300 feet from our house. The current spot is about 20-30 feet. I don't think Rochelle's gonna want to go all the way out to the greenhouse 300 feet away if there's 2 feet of snow outside. So that's another thing to think about. So once you find your location, then you can finally get going and figure out what you want to do on the greenhouse. So I want to show you the original location of where we were going to put the greenhouse,
And right behind me is Rochelle's main area for her garden. Nice big garden over there. And if I do a 180, you'll see right there, this is where we are going to put the greenhouse. All this stuff was not here 6 months ago when we were deciding this. Rochelle's turning this into another area for gardening. And as you can see in the back, I took down a tree right there. That tree is gone because we were going to put a greenhouse here. So in the end, that ends up helping Rochelle with her expanded garden. So that helped. And as you can see in the back, directly behind me is southern facing, exactly where we wanted to be. You can also see more trees that I took out for the greenhouse. And even with all of those taken out, the trees during the spring, early spring, would be blocking the sun. And late spring is when the sun would finally crest up above the trees, and for us it would have just been too late. And so that's why we decided, hey, let's put it closer to the house, make it easier on Rochelle for when she's going back and forth, I assume daily. It'll help her during the winter when there's no snow, or where there is lots of snow, and at the same time it's closer and that location has lots of sun. What did help me determine where the location of the sun was, there's an app, I believe it's called Sun Locator. It's free. You use your phone, it links up to your camera so you can see what it's seeing. And the easiest way to find out if it's working and working right is you find the sun on the Sun Locator, and if it's in the same exact spot where it's supposed to be, I think it's pretty good to go. So using that's how I was able to tell that we weren't going to get the sun in those early months of February, March, and maybe even April. So that's why I wanted to get out of there. With that particular app, it gives you the highest peak of the sun during the summer, and it gives you the lowest peak of the sun during the winter. So you can get a good idea of where that sun's going to be throughout the year. So the next thing you're going to want to figure out when doing a greenhouse is the size. That's obviously, once you found your location, you're like, all right, I want to put it in this spot. You want to find out what your footprint's going to be. We decided it was going to be 20 foot by 10, and that worked out pretty well with us. I think Rochelle is going to have quite a big greenhouse, and she'll be fine for many years. I believe she would have been fine the next couple of years with a 10 by 10, but knowing her, she's going to want to expand, so we just built in the expansion right now. I think the average family will be perfectly fine with a 10 by 10, and even some families will no problems with a 5 by 10 or even 5 by 5, depending on what you want to do. So you got to figure out what you're going to do with your greenhouse, when you want it, and that'll determine how big of a greenhouse you need and want. So once you found out your length and your width of your greenhouse, one thing to consider with greenhouses is the height of the roof. The height for greenhouses, you're generally going to want to have it higher than what you would think. Mine in particular is about on a 45-degree angle. They generally say the higher the better, because then you will have a better chance of controlling the heat that comes in. So if it gets too hot, heat rises, it'll go to your high peak, and then you can try and get that out as fast as you can through your venting system. So the higher the peak, the better. The lower the peak and the flatter it is, the closer it is to your plants, and the less amount of time you have to try and, in a sense, combat that and get it cooler to the temperature that you want. So always keep that in mind. I went with a 45. I did it it gives me enough height, I believe, to the point where we're going to be fine. While at the same time, the height's not too low, where I'm not going to have to worry as much about it getting too hot too quick coming all the way down to the greenhouse. And finally, it worked out pretty well with the 10-foot wide size that we have, and using the standard 8-foot lengths of 2x4s for the rafters in the roof. So now that you know the size, the height, or the location of your greenhouse, we had to prep the area. We couldn't just put on the greenhouse, as you can see, because it's on a slope. So I had to prepare that. we had to get the foundation down and in, and we used the retaining wall blocks as you would see in typical landscaping. We could have used landscaping logs, wood for that, but I wanted something a little more permanent. So the timbers for landscaping would have worked fine, and they'd probably be good for a good at least 10 years. But I wanted something a little more permanent, so I went with the landscaping bricks. The biggest thing I could tell you is level. Keep it level when you do. If you're going to do bricks like I did, each individual block is going to be level, and each block, when you put the one right next to it, they both got to be level on the top height. So when you put the next one on top of it, that one will be level as well. You don't want one the top here and the other one here, and then you go to put another brick on top, it's just going to fall apart. So level, level, level. It's going to take a lot of time to get it level, but once you get it and going, once you start putting that one on top, it's already level. You just keep going, putting them on top. So it's not that bad. The second thing you do, or we did, to prepare the base is we used those 2-inch sized round stones. And the biggest reason why we used the stone is because it was a heat sink. With your greenhouse, during the day, you're going to want that sun to hit those stones and hit those heat sinks and bring in that heat and energy. And at night, when the sun goes down, you're going to want that heat to come out. So that will help you with your heating bill at night, which obviously everybody wants to save some money on some energy. So find some heat sinks. You also want to find something that's going to retain heat and hold it, and I'll call it heat dense, where something like your cast iron pan, the reason why you fry with that is because it holds the heat. Same with pizza stones for cooking. You use those stones because they're going to hold that heat and that temperature for a very long time, so they're heat sinks. They're going to hold it, and then when they're out of that environment, that hot environment, they'll slowly let off that heat, and that's what you want overnight, and that's going to save you some money long term. So after moving about 20 tons of these 2-inch rocks, thanks to the entire family had a hand in that, and even our neighbor Gary, he was kind enough to let us borrow his tractor, which helped us move, I'd say about 9 of those tons in about 3 hours, where the other 11 tons took us about 5 days. So thank you, Gary. So we have great neighbors. But after moving those 20 tons of rocks, and actually a little bit before that, I put in 8-inch diameter concrete pillars. I put in a few of those with a lag bolt or a J bolt, I believe they're called, and that J bolt connects to this 4x4 you can see here. Last thing I wanted was this greenhouse that I put all this time and effort into to just go and essentially fly away because of the wind or something else going on. So I did not want this to move, and that's what I did. So the 4x4 that's here goes all around the perimeter of the greenhouse. It's the whole 20 foot, 10 foot wide. So we have a total of 60 feet of 4x4s on the bottom. I believe I have some pictures of it. Hopefully we can get those up there to show and see you. Also, I put a couple 2x4s going across just to hold shape in the center of the foundation. So that's how we got the foundation down, what's going on there, and now we're finally ready to put up some walls. So the walls, what everybody wants to know, the plans, how'd you do the stud length, how'd you get the windows in exactly where there's no gaps, things like that. Well, let me take it back about 6 months ago. In March, April, Rochelle and I started canvassing Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist for free windows. Didn't care what size shape, what size, anything about it. Size, shape, we didn't care. Color, age, we didn't care. If it was free, it was on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, we were most likely going to be grabbing it. We probably had about 200-ish windows. We did a little overkill, fully admit, but I also did not know how I was going to put the walls up. Like I said earlier, step by step. I got the foundation in. I knew what size I wanted my greenhouse. So now I knew it was time for the walls, and I knew my best chance was to have the most amount of windows to put in, so I would have as many options as possible. So 6 months ago we started that endeavor, and I'd say about 3 months ago we stopped that endeavor, and that's where we got our 150 to 200-ish windows, and it filled up our 2-car garage. All the windows, the doors, everything. So that's the basis of why we went this way, and why I have such a hard time explaining the plan, because there was no plan until almost last minute. So with the walls, we just went forward with it. Another thing to think about was all of this we try to make as much as we could from recycled or reused parts. I'd say 90% of the lumber that you see in the greenhouse, we got off of Facebook Marketplace for either free or darn close to free. All the windows, I think I spent a total of $150, maybe $200 on all the windows. Yes, all the windows that were in the garage, let alone the windows that were put in the greenhouse, as you'll see. So so we tried to do that. I couldn't get enough 2x4s or enough quality 2x4s to do everything, but that's what kind of pushed us, was let's see how much we can recycle, but also, hey, it's free, might as well take it if you can, and if somebody's essentially going to throw it out, why don't we use it? So that's what we did. All right, so now you have all of your wood, all of your windows. You have a garage full just like me, or maybe you only need half a garage full because you're only doing half the size of the greenhouse. Now you're ready to make a plan for your walls. Great. And instead of me just telling you what my plans were, a stud every 18 inches, or this one's 18 inches, the next one's 24 inches, the easiest way to explain is my thought process. And hopefully you can take my thought process and you can make whatever it is that you're looking to do with it. So with all the windows that I had, it took a lot of time planning. When I say planning, I took the measurements of every window that I had. Some of the windows could not be turned 90 degrees, and so I noted that as well, because most of the time your vinyl windows aren't meant to be turned 90 degrees when you install them, so keep that in mind. Other windows, when you have the entire frame around the window, where you can still open and close it, you're not going to be able to turn that 90 degrees. So keep that in mind as well. So make a list of every window you have, all the quantities, and go from there. And once you have that list, you're going to want to find out the windows that have a similar, very similar width. And once again, if you turn it 90 degrees, you can now use the height, but you want the same width because you want your studs going all the way up to the roof. So when you have a, say, 20-inch wide window, you're going to want to keep that same stud width, 20 inches, and you want to take it all the way to the height of your roof. We kept with the 8-foot standard height of the greenhouse. You can do just about any height you want. Of course, with anything, go and find out your code and figure out what's best for you. But typical up here in the Northeast is, if I was doing a shed, I could have either 18-inch on center studs or 24-inch on center studs. So I kind of use that as my guideline as to how wide I could go before there was potentially any issues. So I have all these windows and I know their width, and believe it or not, with wooden windows you can actually skim cut and a half an inch or an inch on each side, so you can now shrink those windows to make them fit. I also knew that I had a height of 8 feet I had to go up, so I'm going up 8 feet. I know my width of that one stud, and now I want to get windows in there to fit it all the way up. So 96 inches is 8 feet. You want to add up the heights of all your windows to get as close as you can, in a sense, without going over to 96 inches high or 8 feet high. At the same time as you can use the 2x4s for height, and you can stick in a 2x4, kind of like this one right here behind me, going left to right there. That one's a little spacer for me, so I didn't have enough height there, so I used that as a spacer to get that particular window, set of windows, up a little bit higher. That probably ended at 94 inches, and I needed 1.5 inches to 2 inches to get up to my 96 and put that in. So that's kind of the baseline of how I did each stud width. And now that I knew, all right, I have such windows, I know that the width of these 3 windows are good for 1 stud. I know the width of these 4 or 5 windows, they're good for this width. I wrote that all down, and I realized, hey, I have a 10 or 20 foot long span. Now I gotta kind of do the same exact thing of putting the windows in these spots to make sure that I get my 10 foot or my 20 foot length as best as I can. And then same idea for the width. When you're going left to right along the wall, you can put in a couple more studs. It's not gonna hurt anything. So there's a couple corners of my walls that have 3 or 4 studs on each side, and that's okay. Having extra wood in there is not gonna hurt anything. So that's how you would make each stud length, and that's how you would make eventually a wall, and then you'd put your 4 walls together, and now you got your walls. So that is kind of the key of what I did. So here's my windows here, and as you can see, on the side just away from the corner, now in the middle of the screen, you can see there's a 2x4 in there. That's because that height did not make it all the way to 96 inches, or my 8 feet, so I needed spacer. I did it again there, and more importantly, I did it on the bottom. I wanted my height to be as high as possible, so for when I started the windows, so if I had a choice of where to put my 2x4, I started it at the bottom. You can also see now in the center of the screen my 2 2x4s in the middle. That's because I needed an extra 1.5 inches of space when I was spacing these out, so you can do that just as well.
Alright, so here we are with the plans. This is how I planned out the windows. As I said before, I wrote down every single window that we got in hand. You'll see that generally I put old. I found out most of these old windows could have lead in them, so we didn't want to use those, so those got crossed out pretty quickly. But you'll see I broke them out into tops and bottoms. For when you're opening and closing your door for your window for your house, you'll have a top or bottom window, so they'll be a little bit different. So I want to designate those. And for this list, DP stands for double paned. Yeah, we did get a bunch of double pane windows for the greenhouse for free from Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. So that was the first thing I did, was list out all the windows. The next thing I did was find their width, just measured the width, the very outside. So, and then I segregated each one. So I started with the smallest width that I had and went all the way up. And then just put the height right next to it and kept going down all the way. And this ROT is for rotate. Can I rotate these 90 degrees? So potentially could I use this 23-inch height as my width for another grouping that we have? Quantity, each one went through. You'll see my check marks for if I found it again, or if I could account for it, or if I used it. And there was a couple that I just couldn't find. I did the measurements, made the spreadsheet, and then I went back the next day and just couldn't find a couple. Next is the row number, or the group number I was talking about, how you want to get the same width for your stud length. So I would group them together in 3 to up to 5 windows. So I would get that together, and I went through and made a list of groupings or rows for my stud widths, and I crossed almost all of them out and kind of started anew. And you can see for this one right here, that one's in part of group number 2. So are all 3 of these for group number 2. So my group number 2 consisted of these 3 windows right here and this one window right there. And because I knew that the row width was 18.5 inches right here, same as that, I just added up all the heights from this 18.5 and the 3 at 24.5, and I got a height of around 92 inches. So now that I got my height of 92 inches, I wanted to make sure that would fit in my 8-foot high windows. 8 foot equals 96 inches. I knew that I had 4 inches left, so in this particular one I probably used 2 2x4 studs for spacing in between the windows, which got me an extra 3 to 4 inches. So put me perfectly in line for where I wanted to be. So group 2 was done. So I took that and I just kept running with it, and I made all my groups. I think I did up to, I think it was 20 groups in the end of the new numbers. Originally I went up to, I guess, 29 and moved from there. So this is my second sheet of windows. Same idea as the first, same exact idea as the first, just a longer list. All my different windows were the old ones I crossed out because I thought there was lead. The other ones where I was pretty sure there was no lead, even though I thought, they were older. There's some telltale signs. You can look online and figure out if they're lead or not, or most likely lead. So that's what we did. And but same idea: the width, the height, the rotatable, the quantities, and my check marks is essentially the double check when I went the next day. Which group? This is group 9 for this very first one. What was the height when I added the group together, and what was the stud width of that particular group. So that's what I did as my planning, and it took me a little while to do that, but after a couple hours of measuring and putting it together, it was good to go. So here's the front, the plan for the front of the greenhouse, the one with the sliding door. No, this is not the scale, but this is basically my drawing that I made from the beginning, how to represent what I was doing. My front is 20 feet, so 240 inches. So I knew that's what I had to work with. And I knew what groupings I had, 3A, I did an A and a B, 3A, 1, 2, B, 4. I did that, and we put it together that way where we took the stud widths from all of those groupings, and now I knew how much wide I had to go for each of the windows, and basically made them fit to make sure I had made my 240 inches. With the sliding door, I knew that was 72.5. I knew I had to put a jack stud and a king stud next to it, and so that gave me the rest of each side divided by 2, and tried to hit what was left and equally done it. And you can see the ends, or the corners of the wall. This one has 3 studs and this one has 4 studs. I just use them essentially as spacers because I couldn't get groupings to fit exactly, so I just went a little bit smaller on my widths for my windows and filled in essentially those gaps, and put the gaps on the end and made them work. And now I had my 240 inches. And down here is just my list of the wood that I was going to need. So this is kind of like the bill of materials for this front. With I needed 13 studs and so on and so forth, so the jack studs are in there, all of that. So that's the front. This is the side with the door, with the stone door. This one, same idea. I knew that I had 113 inches. It's not 120 inches because you got to subtract the widths of the front and the back. So you'll actually have your front here on this corner, and that width of the 2x4s that you have there is going to be here, and the width of the backside is going to be there. So you actually don't have 120 inches, you have 113 once you subtract the width of those 2x4s, and then you can move forward with that. But same idea as the last one. You find what's left of the wall after you subtract out the door, and you try to come as close as you can with the group widths that you have. So my group 5, 6, and 7, they had 24, 22 and a half, and 22 and a half inches wide. It worked out well in this circumstance. I did 2 studs on this side just to possibly make up that gap. And once again, bill of materials there. Back, same idea. Put my groups together. Had a nice window in the middle that actually opens and closes, and same for the other side with the groups. So that worked out. You can see my quick math here. My 240 inches overall for the 20 feet in the back. So my 240 minus all of the pieces of wood minus all of the window groupings, and I actually was oversized by 3/4 of an inch, so that's why it's minus 75, because I had no more room left and went overboard. But in this case, I believe I cut a little bit. I believe I cut off about a 1/2 inch off of row 13, and I cut a 1/2 inch off of group 8, and that left me with about a 1/4 inch of spacing, so that worked out well. And here's the side with the no door that's closest to the woods in our house. 113 inches overall, and the groupings 15, 17, 18, 19 that I used. Also, I wanted to keep things symmetrical, so I needed a space to fill in a gap, so I put in the 2 studs down the middle, which I showed in the video how I had the 2 studs in the middle of that back wall. And the bill of materials.
So now we're talking roof. Now that we got our walls in, got them up, ready to go, now it's time to put the roof on. Typical roofs in this area are 2-foot span, so 2 feet from each rafter to rafter, which is what I stayed with. I generally didn't care where the studs were on my walls because I used a couple top plates, an extra piece of wood or 2 on top of the 8-foot studs of the wall. So I used that to keep that strength up, so then when the weight came down from the roof, there would be no issues. So I got 2-foot wide rafters in the roof, and I also put this beam across right there that goes all the way across the span, the whole 10 feet. That's just to make sure that the roof doesn't push out, and because of the weight, when the weight comes down, it's going to want to push the roof in and out. So obviously we don't want that having snow on there, so that's why we have those in there. Another thing that I kind of mentioned earlier was that having a 10-foot wide greenhouse was perfect for having 5-foot long lengths from the center of the greenhouse out, and having an 8-foot long stud go from the very top peak of the roof all the way down to here with about a 6-inch to a 1-foot overhang. So it worked out really well that an 8-foot stud would fit perfectly. So I had a lot less cutting to do with the saw. So that worked out really nice, having a 45-degree angle for the pitch, or a 1-to-1 pitch there. That brings me to the Gables. The Gables were honestly a last-second afterthought. I knew I was going to have to do them. I had no idea how. I thought it was going to be something similar to what you see here, just with a couple square windows and then fill in with the triangle windows on the corners there. I thought it was going to be like that. It ended up working out that way. That's great. But if I turn you around to the other side, I would have never guessed this would have looked like this, where I have my 2 smaller windows there, and I have these triangles looking like that. I knew my exhaust fan was going to be there, But just wouldn't have guessed I would have been making custom windows, but we learned on the fly, and that's how we got it done. Originally, believe it or not, for the triangles, I was even thinking of just putting up plywood. Obviously, this looks a lot better, but it was a lot more work. So keep that in mind if you're planning to do the custom frames that we were doing.
Thanks for watching part one. That hopefully will get you to the point where you can get the sticks up, the wood, the windows. You get your foundation ideas for that, to show you what I did. Hopefully that helps you on your endeavors. Part two, we're going to get more into a little bit of, I don't want to say bells and whistles, but more of the electricity, the heating, the ventilation, things like that. So things you're going to have to worry about and think about at least a little bit before you just start making your plans, because you'll find out in part two, I didn't think of everything and I had to quickly adjust. I don't want to say quickly, but I had to adjust. So I don't want you to make, in a sense, the same mistake that I did. So take a look at part two when it comes out, and hopefully this will help you out a lot. Thank you.